Masters. So for today, I am going to talk about primitive communism and egalitarian society. I know that this is very familiar to some of you since these are somehow tackled in sociology classes and politics, and that for today, I'm going to thoroughly discuss these two terms so that we will have a new learning for today. So the content of our discussion revolves around the definition of primitive communism, and we are also going to tackle about the characteristic of primitive communism and Marxist theory of primitive communism. And at the same time, we are also going to thoroughly discuss about the definition of egalitarian society and what is the origin of such, and also the economic picture in egalitarian society, modern egalitarianism theory, and that's all. So these contents we are going to discuss that thoroughly. So stay tuned. To clearly understand about primitive communism, we are going to divide these two words and we are going to define each one. So first, primitive. What is primitive? Primitive in the dictionary, it states here that it is an early stage in the evolutionary or historical development of something, meaning to say it is early account. And meanwhile, we are going to define what is communism is. It is advocating class war and leading into society in which all property is publicly owned and each person works and is paid according to their abilities and needs. So that is how it's being defined individually. And here at the next slide, we are going to define, if we are going to combine these two words. Here is the definition of primitive communism. It refers to the collective right to basic resources, the absence of hereditary status or authoritarian rule, and the egalitarian relationships that preceded exploitation and economic stratification in human history. In other words, it is describing the gift economies of hunter-gatherers throughout history, where resources and property hunted and gathered are shared with all members of a group in accordance with individual needs. So it is like a very, idealistic kind of society wherein they are going to gather foods and at the same time they are going to eat that as a whole. So it is like a representation of what unity is, right? Origin of social communism, or where the social communism started. So communism is a political system that comes from the Latin meaning, which is common. Okay, communism, common. Social communism, if you're going to define it, is a system of government in which the state plans and controls the economy and a single, often authoritarian party holds the power, claiming to make progress toward a higher social order in which all goods are equally shared by the people. And in political and social sciences term, communism is commonly known as universal or common. It is the philosophical, social, political, and economic ideology and a movement whose ultimate goal is the establishment of the communist society, which is a socio-economic order structured upon the common ownership of the means of production and the absence of social classes, money, and also the state. Based on the collective ownership of the production of goods, communism rejects individual ownership of industry and promotes the manufacture of goods in order to satisfy the basic needs of the economy and at the same time the people. These two men that is on the right side of your screen is actually very important in the history of primitive communism. These two men is Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. They were actually inspired by Lewis Henry Morgan's description of communism in living that characterized the Iroquois nation of North America. So, a brief description or a brief knowledge about Karl Marx is that they are regarded as the founders of the Marxist revolutionary socio-economical ideology called Marxism. Their intellectual work was geared towards a global understanding of the socio-economic problems, which seemed to originate within the human nature in organized societies. The speculative evolutionary history by Lewis highlighted the liberty and equality among the ancient people that was evident in the family setting in the Iroquois nation. Engels transformed this idea into an evolutionary theory with the publication The Origin of the Family in 1884. He argued that transition from traditional modes of production to subsequent production involves a change of production for domestic or family use to production for sale or exchange, in a transformation from communal family relations to an individual family as the main economic unit. Or, in other words, Marx and Engels expanded the use of communism to include not only the hunters and gatherer but also subsistence agricultural communities. So here is the characteristics of primitive communism. So the first one is full democracy. So this is because about all members of the society had to make decisions to arrive at the solution regardless of their sexes. So it is like the whole decision of the community will base upon the heart and also the opinion of the society. So this is how the primitive communism works. So they do have democracy in choosing what they want, and at the same time I think that it is also nice because they got to express what they want and that they can freely choose what kind of what kind of things they wanted to do in their community. And also the second characteristic is the lack of specialization. This is because all people in the society are supposed to do all jobs together, jobs including tool making, gathering fruit, preparing shelter, and hunting. So because most of the people here should work as one, basically they should be well-rounded about the work in the society or in the community. And the third characteristic is the absence of exploitation. The communal societies has neither exploiters nor exploited. That is the third characteristic. So there is no exploitation that is happening in the primitive communism. The fourth characteristic of primitive communism is the shifting cultivation. So primitive economic organizations were of the subsistence type. That is that they fall into the broad category of production to consumption economy. So they are going to produce, and at the same time they're also the one who will going to eat, to consume, to use the resources that they have gathered. So that is how their economies work. And also the fifth characteristic of primitive communism is the hunting and gathering. So primitive communism hunt animals and gather plants as their means of survival. Hunter-gatherers move about a great deal in search of food, but they cover only a small area. So they are just going to cover a small area because in the primitive communism, there are also places away from their home that is a settlement of other tribes, so that they cannot go beyond their respective community. So they are just going to roam around their society and gather foods and also gather plants to eat, and with such they survive. And next characteristic is they do have low level of development. So this is because there was no surplus. So since there is no surplus, there is no development. So it is as simple as that. So the next characteristic is that they don't have any private ownership. So no private ownership means that the production is the means of such lands, tools, and weapons belong to the community. So the tools that they are using, the what do you call this? The utensils, perhaps, that they use in eating or in gathering foods or in planting trees and such is commonly owned by the community, and that there is no single person out there that owns such thing because there is no private ownership. And the next characteristic is that there is no concept of ownership beyond the individual possessions. The tribe shares everything in order to survive. So just like this is like a connection to the no private ownership. So since there is no private ownership, so basically most of the things that they are using are shared property. Okay, so that is the characteristics of the primitive communism. And then we are going to talk about also the evolution of primitive communism. So the rise of social class society has changed the human history. The communal ways of organizing society have since changed. Humans have moved from a society of equality and communal living to one characterized by oppression and exploitation. So since the community evolved, they found out that things don't work this way. So basically, they maybe some of the people out there wants to lead their community, and that they wanted to express authority by means of force and such. And also I do have research of something that actually there is a person there in the community that discover force to make or to oppress people out there, so that most of the community in that particular area is going to follow his commands, his decision, and that he invented that spear, like the stick with like a very sharp end, and that he's going to threat anyone in the community that if they are not going to follow his command, he is going to use his force. And that I do believe that is also part of how the primitive communism evolved to being a oppressed one, and that exploitation is not present. So I think that is also part of the evolution of the primitive communism. Here is actually the theory of Karl Marx about the primitive communism. Marx's initial drive to create the basic tenets of communism began in the middle of the 19th century as he observed the existing capitalist system being used as a tool by the bourgeoisie to enslave the working class or the proletariat. So meaning to say that Karl Marx began to open his eyes when he saw that most of the bourgeoisie are actually trying to oppress those working class people, and that because of that he introduced the primitive or the communism. They said that the ancient communal and state ownership, which proceeds especially from the union of several tribes into a city by agreement or by conquest. During this stage, the concept of private property begins to develop. Just like what I have said earlier, that the primitive communism in the earlier stage doesn't own a private property. Most of the things that they are using, like for example in hunting or in gathering, it is primarily owned by the community itself. Like they, as a whole, own that thing. So in this stage, most of the people here owns something, and that is called as private property. His well-known tome, The Communist Manifesto, was published in 1848 and written with Friedrich Engels, sought to outline the basic faults of capitalism and educate readers on the principles of communism, and then mark solutions to the perceived problem of a free market society. And on the other hand, the manifesto contained 10 steps, known as the 10 planks, were intended as a test to determine if the society had successfully become a communist state. The manuscript led to the banishment of Marx, his wife, and children from both Germany and France, and he lived the remainder of his years in the London beginning in 1849. So that causes them to move from one place to another because of this book. The stage ends with the development of private property, especially with the development of large-scale agriculture. This in turn produces productive property such as cattle and slaves. So the story ends with the stage ends with how they manifested a privately owned cattle and slaves. So that is what the theory of Marxists regarding primitive communism means. Social class in communism. The members of the Communist Party are supposed to make the working class realize that the capitalists exploit them and get them to revolt. Members of the Communist Party have to convince the people to form the ideal communist state and have to fight against the capitalists with all possible means. Marx and Lenin perhaps knew that the ideal state couldn't be created in one day. For some time, the Communist Party would have to rule the state to subdue the capitalist resistance, to re-educate the people, and to convince them to become useful members of the society. This gives the Communist Party absolute power in the communist countries, and like Action said, power tends to corrupt. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. That is a great quotation out there. So here are actually the two main social classes. The first class is the working class. So the working class is those workmen and laborers who are exploited by their capitalist bosses. And we also have the capitalists. They just profit from the work of their employees and are seen as the enemy of the working class. So that is the capitalists and also the working class. But they should be extinguished or re-educated, because in the ideal communist society, there are no classes anymore. Everybody works not for the money, but to be a useful member of the society. So that is what should people think in modern or in the ideal communist society, where they are not just working for money, but they are working as a substantial member or as a substantial part of the community. Here are the perceived benefits of communism, starting with the first benefit, which is theoretically, a communist society promotes the equality of all people. Classes do not exist in a communist system, and therefore all citizens are equal. This eliminates the class struggle that Marx believed caused numerous conflicts, including shortages and war. And then the second benefit is communist ideology seeks to eliminate child labor and encourage education for everyone. Each child is entitled to an education under a communist principles, and it's also nice because, as we all know, education is the key to success, and that communism is actually great in doing such. And then the third benefit is Communism supports a lack of competition, which originates within its belief in equality for everyone. So it is nice because they are working as a whole, just like what I have said earlier. Most of the people here are actually working towards the development or as a whole in the presence of unity. That is how they work, and that is why they are not going to compete with everyone. And then the fourth benefit is that while communism does not support private industry, it does support the role of the worker. Under the communist system, every member of the society is given a job. The government owns all production and can therefore employ each member of society. In a capitalist economy, employment and flows, lack of employment can lead to poverty, lowered self-esteem, and substance abuse. In a communist system, all citizens are actually provided with work. So we are now with the egalitarian society. What is egalitarian society, by the way? An egalitarian society is one in which there are as many positions as possible of prestige in any given age, sex, and grade. There are persons capable of filling them. That is the definition of egalitarian society. Origin of egalitarian society. Egalitarianism is a school of thought that prioritizes equality for all people. According to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, egalitarian doctrines maintain that all humans are equal in fundamental worth or social status. In other words, the term has two distinct definitions in the modern English, either as a political doctrine that all people should be treated as equal and have the same political, economic, social, and civic rights, or is a social philosophy advocating the removal of economic inequalities among people, economic egalitarianism, or the decentralization of power. Some sources define egalitarianism as the point of view that equality reflects the natural state of humanity, as they should. Pastoralism is the first economic feature in egalitarian society, which means that it refers to owning domesticated animals for production, transportation, or slaughter, as well as successfully stealing horses and maintaining a herd of livestock. So they are actually domesticating animals such as horse to use them as a part of their living, especially in their work perhaps, and also in their food. They're eating, the things that they are domesticating also. And also they do possess generosity, which refers to displaying kindness through throwing feast, giving gift, self-search depreciation, distributing resources or property among the group, and providing voluntary assistance in economic activities. So in the egalitarian society, they also possess this kind of, good personality, which allows them to help other people within the society, like they are offering their help, and it is a great way to do within the society. And also one of the economic feature is also the technology, which refers to the demonstrating of a proficiency and specialized manufacturing of tools or functional products such as arrows, crafted tools, canoes, etc., as well as displaying superior mechanical skills. So they also possess this, low-key engineering stuff, like, making arrows, bows, which is very pivotal or important in their living because, like what they have said, they are hunters and they gather foods through these tools. And the next one is hunting, which refers to demonstrated competence in hunting by reliably providing protein from wild game for distribution. So they also need protein. So in order to have that protein, they need to eat, animal meat such as, deer. And by doing such, they need to hunt, and they're going to use the things that they have done, which is the arrow. Like they created arrow to hunt, and that is the primary reason why they created such. And here also they do have exchange, which refers to maintaining exchange relationships with kin, friends or allies, formal gift between families during visits, and maintaining debts stored through property loans and success in trading. And also, we do have wealth. Refers to culturally specific luxury goods such as rare or liquidable assets through travel or trade, owning a high quality dwelling, and owning symbolically or economically valid items or slave ownership. So that is say, if they have slaves, they are considered as rich or wealthy. And lastly, they do have an economic feature, which is horticulture, which refers to success in growing food, producing surpluses of staple crops, consistently yielding good harvests, proficiency in gathering wild plant foods, skills in tree felling, and maintaining productivity and cultivation. So they also do farming in their own ways, like they are, planting trees, and that they're also the one to eat that. So that is some of the economic features in the egalitarian society. And the political feature in egalitarian society is first, they do have geographic knowledge, which refers to owning the homeland while being able to predict or identify resources, traveling to foreign land, pioneering new territory, processing knowledge of the outside world, traveling in dangerous and life-threatening condition, and then the ability to influence outsider for group interests in maintaining or establishing inter-group political relationship. So they need to have that geographical knowledge to successfully go to other places and know what that place have, and to maintain kinship towards their way also, so that they will know what society they're going in. They need to have that geographical knowledge. Also, they do have kinship marriage, which refers to maintaining kin alliances, the ability to influence and organize distant kin, supporting extended kin and single household marriage for kin alliance, maintaining marriages in the interest of kin group, having many wives or dependents, and marriage exchange. So that is how they value or how they show kinship marriage. To have the ability to influence, they need to have more kin. And also, they do have this oratory skill as a political feature in egalitarian society, which refers to being able to organize a large group of individuals under a common goal, ability to clearly and eloquently communicate to a crowd. So it is a prime or a somehow a great talent if you can speak towards people, because it is the ability for you to communicate to other society perhaps, and then convince them to have this or to have that. And by doing so, you will maintain or have that ability to influence other people. So that is why they do have oratory skill in the egalitarian society. The next political feature is the dispute settlement, which refers to the ability to resolve conflicts, including miming and comedy to displace attention, mediating fair discourse between individuals, or having demonstrated successful in group or out of the group resolutions. So this is a great way to resolve conflicts in a society. Like they are using comedy to somehow divert the seriousness within the conflict so that both parties are going to resolve it in a nice way and without any violence. One of the political features also in egalitarian society is warfare, which refers to being a natural leader in battle, displaying courage on the battlefield, having successfully killed enemies, demonstrating a willingness to go to war, and returning alive. So that is also how they manage to go to places and own that particular territory. And by that, they need to have wars and to kill enemies to acquire such land. And that is an important, political feature, warfare in egalitarian society. They do also have ritual features in egalitarian society with starts with the augury, which refers to being able to predict events or catastrophes, and then the ability to interpret dreams and the foreseeing the future and foreseeing success. So I think that is also important because on those eras wherein this elitary society is present, they don't have technology to have scientific basis on how events or how catastrophes work, and because of such, they just rely to these auguries to find answers to their questions. And also, they do have shamanism, which refers to successfully healing deceased individuals, possessions of supernatural spirits, application of medicinal plants, or magical surgical techniques, the use and application of magic for healing purposes, or manipulation of spirit world. So that is how they, manage to treat diseases, sickness from their people. The shamans, they actually successful in doing such, and I think there are no scientific basis regarding that, but I think it is actually the faith that healed them. I think so. That is why some of the rituals are successful in their way. And also they do have ceremony, which refers to displaying ritual leadership or experience completion of initiating ceremonies associated with puberty or age set requirements, completion of cultural ceremonies related to the situations or needs by the members in elite or secret societies, or the ability to transfer ritual or ceremonial knowledge. What is modern egalitarianism theory? Modern egalitarianism theory is a theory that rejects the classic definition of egalitarianism as a possible achievement economically, politically, and socially. Modern egalitarianism theory or new egalitarianism outlines that if everyone had the same opportunity cost, then there would be no comparative advances and no one would gain from trading with each other. In essence, the immense gains that people receive from trading with each other arise because they are unequal in characteristics and talents. These differences may be innate or developed so that people can gain from trading with each other. That is all for today. Thank you so much. I hope you learned something from me. This has been Dad's Erin Cuneta, your aspiring educator.